how to have a meaningful life. Although I don't always do this, even though I'm a philosopher, I think the best way to start is to ask, what is meaning? Let's take a look at decisions that we make and rate them in terms of how meaningful they are. What shall I have for breakfast? Wheaties or Cheerios? By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'll probably have forgotten what I had. It's not a very meaningful decision. What should I do for the weekend? Okay, Sunday, Monday. Think about it. And go and do it. If I had a good time, tell people about it. By next Wednesday, it'll be next weekend that's going to be on my mind, and not last weekend. Where shall I spend summer vacation? If you're fortunate enough to be a completely irresponsible American college student, you have 20 weeks a year of vacation. I'm sure that's not enough, but still. And the summer vacation could be 12 weeks. Wow, that's a long period of time. What am I going to do? I think I'm going to take a helicopter trip in Alaska. That would be something. Plan it for a couple of months beforehand, and enjoy it while I'm doing it, and then talk about it for a couple of months afterwards. Much more than a weekend. What should I major in college? Many people, when they go to college, don't know what they're going to major in. You have to find a major. That's something which can take years to decide. And then deciding it has a very strong impact on the direction in which you will go. Major in chemistry, there are quite a number of different types of employment or activity that are based on chemistry, but certainly not the same as learning Chinese history or law or art. It does channel you to a certain extent, a channel which is going to affect the rest of your life. What particular profession to go into? How will you earn your money? That's very meaningful. You're going to spend a giant chunk of your life working. And it's going to determine the kind of life that you have, the amount of money that you have, the kind of people you will interrelate with. It's a very meaningful decision. Whom to marry? One of the most meaningful decisions that a person will ever make. Why? Because it will have a bigger impact on everything that he does, everything that he experiences, everything that he plans, the way in which he conducts his life. So when you think about these different alternatives and you think about them on a scale of meaningfulness, what seems to come out is the more connected the decision is to the past and future, both in extent, how much of the past is spent planning for the decision, and how much of the future, how much time in the future is affected by the decision, and also how many different aspects of life are affected by the decision, that determines how meaningful the decision is. If this is right, then meaningfulness is a matter of connectedness. What creates meaning is the connection between the events that take place. Roughly, the more connection, the more meaning. So living a meaningful life requires thinking about your life and thinking about each of the periods or each of the events, each of the days, each of the decisions, and to see how it fits into everything else that's going on. That doesn't mean the fit has to be a smooth fit. If at the age of 17 or 23, you wake up and think, man, I'm on the wrong track. the wrong track. We're in the wrong direction. This isn't good. And you start to work to change direction. That work of changing direction is directly related to all the years that came before it. It's in relationship to them. You have to now undo some of the habits that you built up. You may have to revise your friendships or your commitments or your allies. And as you do so, you're struggling with the habits that you've built up and the reactions you've built up. So it's not just disconnected because you're changing direction. Contrary, it's a change of direction. A change of direction is directly related to everything that you did before. So it means trying to be conscious of where you're standing in life, where you've been, and where you're hoping to go. Now, you can't have fixed long-range plans. That's not practical. One of the rules that I've learned in life is don't make a decision until you have to. Because if you make it prematurely, you then may miss opportunities that you otherwise would have seen. If you had seen those other opportunities, you would have made a different decision. We had sometimes students say that come here in say Yeshiva for a year, and in November they want to know where should I try to get into graduate school, and what should I major in? So I said, November? Wait till January. Don't make a decision in November. A lot's going to happen between November and January. If you make the decision now, then you may block out those experiences between November and January, which would have set you on a different course had you been open to receive them. So that's one way to promote meaningfulness, to think in terms of the connectedness of your life. But then there's a second feature, and that is, where is this connectedness? I'll give you two gross alternatives. One is that connectedness can be in your brain, and the other is connectedness can be in the world. But they aren't always the same. Would it be satisfactory that you had a plan and in your plan everything was connected? Would that be satisfactory? Even if the plan that you're making is totally unrealistic? Has nothing to do with the real world? I'll give you an example. This example won't resonate with everybody, but if it doesn't, then you have some things to correct. Communism. Communism had a grand picture of how everything works. There's the law of the succession of economic systems, from feudalism to capitalism to socialism, an iron law of history. That's the way it has to go. According to some communists, the economy dictates everything else about the culture. Economy dictates sport. Economy dictates religion. Economy dictates politics. Economy dictates everything. Economic determinism. And then the vision was, you're living in a capitalist society. It's going to become communist. That's given. The only question is, how will it happen? Quickly or slowly, greater disruption or less disruption, more destruction, less destruction. And the slogan was, lessen the birth pangs of history. History is going to give birth to socialism for capitalism. Work in such a way that the transition should be as smooth as possible, as quick as possible, so that there'll be as little suffering as possible. Don't try to resist it because it's inevitable. So people gave their lives to this vision. If you ask them, what are you doing? How's it related to your past? How's it related to your future? They have a story. They have a story of how it's related, but it turns out that that story lives only in their minds. It doesn't live in the real world. The story is false. There's no such rule, not for economic determinism and not for the iron law of going from feudalism to capitalism to socialism. Certainly not an iron law. They predicted the death of nationalism, the death of the nation state, the identification of people with the economic class worldwide. It didn't happen. When the Soviet Union collapsed, all the peoples didn't become proletariats. No, they reinvented nation states, and Czechoslovakia broke up into 3 nations because nationalism is very strong and very important. It just didn't happen the way they decided. So when you're talking about having a meaningful life, and the meaning is the connectedness of your life, you have to ask yourself, would it be satisfactory to me if I had a vision, and in my vision is everything's connected, even though it wasn't really connected in the world? Is it just subjective, that I feel a connection? Or is there an element to it that should be real? And this is a deep, deep issue. Viktor Franco, who invented a school of psychotherapy, which is sometimes called logotherapy or existentialist therapy, lived through the concentration camps of the Second World War, the Jewish camps, and he records meaning. This was the main thesis. His major work was made in search for meaning. That meaning enables people to live healthy, productive lives in psychological terms. And he gave 2 examples that I remember. One was the example of a man who he was interred in this camp, and his brother was interred in a camp 50 miles away. And the man in his camp believed that if he, the man in his camp, bore the suffering well, bravely, consistently, that his brother 50 miles away would survive. And that gave him the strength to bear it with courage, with consistency. Of course, factually, there's absolutely no connection between how this brother in this camp bore his suffering and whether the brother in the other command was going to survive or not. But living that internal subjective meaning made his life stronger. The other example he gave was a woman who was dying in the hospital, and her last few days, which were very difficult, were made easier by the dialogue that she had with the tree outside her window. Not monologue, dialogue. She's talking to the tree, and the tree's talking back to her. Now, I don't know what your philosophy is and what you believe, and whether you're a fan of Peter Singer and you've expanded to plants now, but we take it for granted the tree was not talking to her. This was her fantasy. Now, no one will deny someone a fantasy if that fantasy can help them live a stronger life. But in order for the fantasy to work, the person has to believe it's real. He doesn't know that he's indulging in a fantasy. Because if he knew that he was indulging in a fantasy, it wouldn't work for him. Why? Why does it matter? If meaning can be just subjective, be just a connection in your mind, play with it. I'm sorry?
At what point does it turn into, you're an idiot?
I'm sorry, you're what?
At what point does it turn into mentalism?
I'm not following you at all.
At what point does the guy turn into an idiot? Mental?
An idiot? A mental?
At what point, if you have a fantasy so strong, at what point does it turn mental?
Turn mental. I don't know what turn mental means. You mean the person's mentally disturbed?
Yeah, at what point does it turn? Like, the tree's actually talking back to me.
Well, I think that there's a disconnect from reality there. I mean, that's obvious because the tree isn't talking back to the person.
So at what point is it dangerous? Not dangerous. At what point is it turn?
Oh, dangerous? That depends on what its consequences will be. This woman was dying. She was the last 2 days she was in bed. She was not dangerous for anybody. And it made her more able to bear the suffering that she was going through. So its consequences for her were positive. I'm just pointing out that in order for a subjective meaning to work for a person, to give him a sense that his life is meaningful, he's got to believe it's real. If he believed that it was only made up by him, and had no reality outside of it, it wouldn't work for him. Why is that? Why is that? Because our concept of real meaning is not something that's just subjectively compelling. A concept of real meaning is something which I'm participating in something that's objectively real. That's what makes it meaningful. It's not just that my life is connected, psychologically connected, that I see similarities in development if it doesn't contribute to anything real outside of me. The point of it is that it's supposed to be my sense of connectedness because I'm perceiving something in the world that's really connected. If I found out that it wasn't really connected, it wouldn't give me that sense of meaningfulness. Let's take a gross example that I use over and over and over again. Up until about 150 years ago, when people had fevers, they were bled. Doctors took blood from their body. They used leeches or they used suction cups because medicine preached that will definitely be good for people with fevers for thousands of years. Imagine a doctor who's doing this on the basis of accepted medical procedure, and he feels, I'm helping people be healthy, helping them survive the fevers, and that makes my life a good life because I'm really doing this for people and so forth and so on. And then 2 weeks before he dies, he finds out the whole thing was a mistake. You're really hurting people. I think he's going to be bitterly disappointed. He's not going to say, "Oh, I had a real connected life. Listen, everything, everything fit together, and everything would develop one thing to another. It was fine, I don't think he's going to say that. Of course, he doesn't have to feel guilty. He wasn't irresponsible in any way, but in fact, he hurt people rather than helping them. We have a pull to reality. We feel sorry for people who have these grand pictures, and these grand pictures have captured them, and they're living in terms of them, and they're false pictures. We feel sorry for them because they're living their lives out of touch with reality. And it's appropriate to feel sorry for them because were they to realize that they were living out of touch with reality, they themselves would regret it. So when we talk about a meaningful life, it's not enough, as I said, to have a grand picture. You want the grand picture to be true. I have an illustration of this idea, which, I don't know who took it from who. I read it in H.G. Wells, who wrote science fiction books in the first half of the 20th century, and one of them was called The Dream Machine. I know Robert Nozick used it in a book. I think I told it to him. But maybe I saw it in this book. I don't remember. And the idea was this: that this is science fiction. They have a machine. They connect you to the machine. And it causes you to dream. And they can program it to dream, make you dream whatever you want. You tell them, and they make it work. There's only one hitch. Now I'm not sure whether this was when Wells picked the story or I made it up. But the hitch is, if you connect yourself they connect you to the dream machine, you stay connected until you die. No such thing is coming off it. So now the question is this. It doesn't cost anything. They're doing it because some philanthropist made it available. And you can tell them whatever kind of dreams you want to have. Lots of pleasure and lots of accomplishment. And if pleasure and accomplishment is boring, there'll be some tough times also, and some striving, and then some great victories, and so on and so on. And let's say you're 25 years old, so you got 100 years of programmed dreams until your body dies. Would you take it? So when I ask that of people, some people say yes, and some people say no. Some people say yes because, wow, the experiences I will have in the dream machine far outclass the experiences that I can expect to have in the real world. And other people say, well, it's true, I'll certainly enjoy it more, be thrilled more, be inspired more, but it's fake. And I don't want to trade real life for a fake life. So there you have a split in two populations. So if you tell me that you wouldn't take the option of the dream machine, then you're already on the side of reality and truth that I'm plumping for. But if not, and I could hear people go either way, I've actually met people who went either way, then I'll refine the option more narrowly. They come to you with the dream machine and say, listen, unbeknownst to you, using Google and all the rest, we've been surveying you and watching you, every click on your phone, every click on your computer, and we know you. We know exactly who you are. We know what you do, what you like. We know what your capacities are. And we know that with the right resources, you could cure cancer. And we have unlimited funds. So we are offering you two options. We'll give you unlimited funds, and in 30 years you'll cure cancer, or we'll plug you into the dream machine and you'll dream that you'll cure cancer. As far as the experiences of life are concerned, they'll be identical. It's just that in the first option, the experiences will be part of the real world, and in the second case, the experiences will be as a part of what you're dreaming. Because you won't know that you're dreaming. You'll have them as if they were real experiences. Now, given that option, what would you do? Flip a coin? I don't know anybody who would flip a coin under those conditions. Because if you do it in the real world, millions of people's lives are going to be saved by what you do. If you do it in the dream machine, you're only going to dream their lives will be saved. But real people are going to still suffer. That being the case, I think this example shows that everybody has some pull to the real world. Everybody has some concern for what's going on in the real world. Now, that's not the only thing we're concerned with. We are concerned with our pleasure. We are concerned with our sense of success, and so forth and so on. And sometimes they conflict, and sometimes we have to make decisions. And sometimes we do opt for fantasy rather than for facing reality. We very often pay for it. When you see somebody who's infatuated with someone of the other sex, and you say to the person, don't you realize she's using you for dirt? And when she's tired of you, she's going to throw you over. No, it's true love, and we'll be together forever. We'll be happy forever. And you think, what a poor guy. He's just lost. He's lost. And we know what's going to happen. Right? So being out of touch with reality has its costs. So, but still, he psychologically is overwhelmed by his feelings to the point where he doesn't want to face the reality. Okay, that happens to people. But everybody has some care for living in the real world. So, a meaningful life has two conditions. It's the amount of connectivity that it offers to you, and it's also a matter of its being real connectivity that's reflected in the real world, not just subjective and psychological. This is what the Torah offers. The Torah offers a life of maximum real meaning. I was stimulated to think about this by someone who played a role in my early years of becoming frum, Avraham Horowitz, the nephew of my Rebbe, Boston Rebbe. And he said to me once, you know what my goal in life is? My goal is that my children should look like my parents. I said, really? That's your goal in life? You know, clothes style shouldn't change? You know, that's a goal in life? He says, no, I'll tell you what I mean. There's a chain. Chain starts with Avraham. And the chain is going to the Mashiach, to the Messiah. I don't want to be a broken link. I want my life to link my parents to my children. So I thought, wait a minute. When he gets up in the morning, he's carrying 3,000 plus years of history and future in his everyday life. That's what he's carrying. He's linking Abraham to the Mashiach. Wow. Talk about meaning. That's exquisite. So when you do a mitzvah and you know what Rabbi Kiva did and what Hillel said about it, what Rashi said about it, and what's written in the Mishnah, and the Psukim, and the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral tradition coming from Moses, you have a vast, vast network of connections. You know, when you see in the United States of America, you see a house that has on it genuine certified historical site, 100 years old. 100 years old. You know, like 100 years ago it was the Chafetz Chaim. Before him there was for 3,300 years to Sinai, which then goes back to Avram. 100 years old. Wow-wee. You know, that's, you know, the thickness of your thumbnail compared to the whole body. So what you have to look at in the Torah is the connectedness plus the knowledge that it's dealing with real features of the world, not features of the world that are just appealing psychologically. And this is a very important idea to assimilate. Now, when I say assimilate an idea, I'm leaning on Rav Dessler now. I don't mean just accepting or rejecting the idea. There's a big difference between, it's a, yes or no answer. Is this true? True or false? Oh, yeah, it's true. Next question. Do you owe some honor to your parents? True or false? True. Next question. Wait a minute. Really? So then, what should I do? Am I doing it? Am I doing it right? I wonder what they say about it. What are the implications? How does it compete with my other concerns? To assimilate it means to live with the idea, not just to know in your memory box that it's the right box to check on the exam is true rather than false. So this kind of meaning has to be assimilated. One of the things that you think of is the idea of representing. What do you represent? The verse says, Atem Eidai, which says, you are my witnesses in the world. So you don't live as an individual. What you do represents HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world. Not only in the fact that people look at you, and especially the way you dress, and they measure your behavior and their appreciation, or the opposite of the Torah on the basis of what you do. So you're not just representing yourself. I'll give you an analogy. Suppose you live in a society where your personal name, your family name, and the identity of your family is something you wear on your chest. When you are walking in public and when you're acting in public and you're wearing your family medallion on your chest, I think you would act differently than if you were anonymous. Because whatever I do is going to reflect on my family. And just as I would expect them to behave well so as to reflect well on me, I feel a responsibility that will help reflect on them. Now you know that they're going to associate you with the Jewish people, so you don't live life in the same way because what you're doing is representative of them. When you go a step further and you say that people are looking at me as someone who's pledged allegiance to a certain system which is authored by the creator of the universe, then it leads to expectations for your behavior. I'm sure you've heard this probably often, where Israel, Jewish people are criticized on the basis of their behavior, and the defender says, look what the Austrians did, and look what the Australians did, and look what the Bosnians did. So, and you're criticizing us for what we do? Now, in those comparisons, there's a profound truth and a profound falsehood. The profound truth is, yeah, we do better than they do. We definitely do. You're talking about the Israeli Defense Forces, they do better than every army in the world. But so what? That's something we should be proud of, that we're better than the rest of the non-Jewish world? We should expect ourselves to be better, much better. We come from a history utterly unlike that of any other nation. We come from a divine investment utterly unlike that of any other nation. We can't take pride in the fact that we're not as bad as the Americans. So now, when non-Jews criticize us in what we regard as unfair ways, there's a kind of dim recognition of this. Yeah, but you're a Jew. So we do hold you to a higher standard. We do expect more from you. Because you're special. So that, even if they don't admit it consciously, it's an undercurrent in the way in which they look at us. Part of this I was just the other way. This is part of the reason why, as is often mentioned, that the United Nations, where it condemns various nations for their behavior, the number of condemnations of Israel is bigger than all the other combinations combined. Golly, isn't that a little out of proportion? Well, it's certainly out of proportion to our percentage of the world population, If you talk about what should be realistic appreciation of what we should be standard we should be held up to, no, it isn't. It isn't so out of proportion because we have a much greater divine investment in us, and therefore it can be reasonably expected that we will behave in a way considerably better. That doesn't mean all the criticisms are fair, and it doesn't mean that we never fail. We do fail from time to time. So this is part of living in this sense of reality as something that's real, not something that's just pleasing to me. One big element of this is the way in which people develop when they start exploring traditional Judaism, not coming from traditional Jewish home. The first stage is always a stage of an adventure. This is something new, and it's intriguing, and it has ideas that are challenging, and it has practices that are inspiring. Yeah, I'm going along for the ride, for a while anyway. Let's see, let's try it out, let's test it, argue, discuss, compare, write home to friends and see what they say. It becomes an adventure, and it's perfectly appropriate that it should be an adventure. That's the only beginning point at which the interaction can start. It's not as if you can sit through 3 weeks of classes and come to know that it's true and accurate and historical and be able to argue the issues and so on and so on. Part of the understanding what Yiddishkeit is experiencing Yiddishkeit. But at a certain point, you have to graduate out of that. Why? Because as long as there's an adventure, for me, I am the measure of it. Whether it is worthwhile, isn't worthwhile, depends upon what it's doing for me. At a certain point, you have to graduate to saying, it is the reality. And I don't measure it by what it's doing for me. I measure myself by what I'm doing for it. That's a big shift in your consciousness. Big shift in where the balance of significance rests. I'll tell you something that Chaim Shmulevitz wrote in one of his essays. His essays are translated into English. And he was the Rosh Yeshiva, and he was the Mashgiach in the Mir Yeshiva. His essays are iron. Everything he says, he brings sources, and the sources prove what he says. He's very, very, very tough-minded, which I appreciate because my training was in logic. In the book of Deuteronomy, it says a couple of times, don't add or subtract from the Torah. And in one place it says, don't add or subtract from the Torah. Remember what I did to the people who worshipped Molech. So, one second. Worshipped. No. Oh, man. What is that Chumash there? Is that Chumash? I think it's in chapter 6. I think is it? But Molech sacrificed their children. Not Molech. Go back and find it. Sachar. Not now. Here it is. Baal Peor. Yeah, I'm glad I looked it up. Baruch Hashem. Baal Peor. Baal Peor was an idol where the worship was to defecate in front of the idol. That was the worship. And the Gemara says that there was a Jew who got involved. He defecated and then he wiped himself on its nose. And they said, wow, leave it to a Jew, They're tops. They really get it. Invented the supreme worship of Baal Peor. what is that? What kind of worship is that? So he explains it as follows. You have an idol. Everybody else bows to the idol. Everybody else worships the idol, right? You know what we do? We use it to clean ourselves, which means to say that we worship ourselves. We are superior to the idols. The idols serve us. We don't serve them. We don't serve anything. Now it says, you're going to add and subtract from the Torah. Why are you going to do that? What's motivating you to do that? Well, you know, some of it isn't modern, and some of it takes time, and some of it, you know, is uncomfortable or unpleasant. And besides, you won't get likes on your Facebook account. So, these things are, you know, just not practical to do. And by the way, there isn't time for pork ends and cheeseburgers. You know, let's be realistic. You know, these things are good. They're very tasty, and why should we not have them? So, you know, well, meaning what? Meaning the Torah serves you. You don't serve the Torah. It serves you. Well, remember what I did to the people who practiced the rites of Baal Peor. I destroyed them. That's what you are. You're setting yourself up as the top of the chain. So if you're still on the adventure level, where whether you continue and how you continue depends upon what it contributes to your adventure, you're still at the primitive level of making the Torah into a means by which you can improve the life you have already independently of the Torah. It becomes a means to serve your pre-Torah ends. The graduation is to understand that the Torah sets the ends. It defines the ends. And then my life becomes evaluated by how much I achieve of the ends that the Torah sets. That's moving from its subjective impact to its objective reality. That means you're graduating from merely subjective feeling of meaningfulness to a real meaningfulness, one that's connected to something that's real, that's realistic. Sometimes I put the point this way. Take people who, we often have students here who are not yet believers, hopefully they develop into believers, and they're testing the experiences and the ideas, and I say to them, okay, look, I'm not asking for any commitments, and I know that some of you don't have commitments, but I want you to exercise your imagination. I want you to imagine being together with 3 million other people in the presence of a mountain, and all of you simultaneously hearing a revelation. And that revelation contains, among other things, the information that Saturdays are special. Saturdays have to be dedicated to certain types of activities. Now, if that happened to you, would that change your plans for the weekend? Or would you say, well, yeah, I know, we all experience this together, and I know Creator of the universe and all that, but I have a scuba diving date for Saturday. It was nice, but sorry. Most people that I talk to, imagine that it really happened to them, say, yeah, that would change my plans for the weekend. Definitely. I would take that into account. That's because that makes it real. That makes it not just an idea, not just a historical tradition, which may or may not, but that would make it real. Okay, and then sometimes the student says, but it didn't happen to me, so I'm going scuba diving. I said, well, wait a second. It didn't happen to you. So what? One of the main differences between the human life and a squirrel's life is that every squirrel lives like every squirrel has from the beginning of time. Their lives are pure repetition. Our lives aren't like that because you only have to invent the wheel once. The next generation inherits the wheel. They invent something else. So that means you have a cumulative culture absorbing ideas and inventions and practices and information, and then each generation adds to that. So the fact that you didn't experience Sinai, but suppose when you examine the historical record, all the information you have points to the fact that real people did experience Sinai. So then that ought to be the same, have the same effect on your looking at it as a real event, because you understand what history is. And that being the case, it becomes part now of the world outside of you that you're relating to, rather than something that's inside of you that's making your life feel a certain way. There's a lot of this I do in my book, Reason to Believe. But this then is what the real meaningfulness of life consists in. The connectedness that is involved in a pattern that actually is part of the real world. So now, when you confront people who don't have this, they can fail to have it in two different ways. They can either fail to have it because they're living moment to moment, or they're in possession of another idea like communism, which gives them a big picture. It's just that it's not a true picture. Given what I have told you, it's not impossible to reach them and convince them that they're missing out on something. The first person is missing out on the fact that the interrelationship of what goes on in your life makes the things in your life much more meaningful. When you have an 8-year goal like a PhD, you start college and you want to get a PhD, an 8-year goal. When you achieve it, you've been directing your activities for 8 years to aiming at a certain outcome, and then the outcome is achieved. That's a gigantic pleasure, gigantic inspiration. And then with a PhD, you can get a job, either in academia or in industry, and that can be the platform for a great deal of the rest of your life. So for a person to say, yeah, but I saw a great movie last night on television, yeah, I'm sure you did, but you're missing out on a lot. And it doesn't have to be a PhD. You could become a sports person, or you could paint pictures, or you could be a politician and bring some peace and prosperity to the world. There are lots of things that you can do which give your life a substance that otherwise wouldn't have. And if the person is into the idea of meaning, but is attached to a meaning that's incorrect, that's unrealistic, the first thing that I would say to such a person is, do you recognize that some grand ideas are wrong? Some of them? Well, probably he does, because if he has a grand idea, there are probably other people who have a grand idea that conflicts with his. So, that being the case, if he thinks that his idea is correct, as I said, it's not going to work for you if you don't think it's right. If you think you just made it up, it's a fantasy, then it's not going to work for you. So then I said, well, okay, so then you think your idea is right, they think their idea is right, one of you isn't right, and maybe both of you are wrong, because it could be that some third idea is right. So somebody's making mistakes somewhere. Let's think about whether you're the one who's got it right, and they got it wrong, or otherwise. Or maybe both of you have it wrong and something else is correct. You can appeal to where the person is in order to move him to the next stage. That's a rule in education, and it's a rule in argument and persuasion. You must always start where the person is. If I want to prove to someone that Q is correct, and I say, look, do you agree to A? I'm sorry, I said to him, you see that if A is true, Q is true, right? Yes. So? He says, yeah, but I don't think A is Q either. It's true either. Not A is true, not Q is true. They didn't get anywhere. You got to start from where he is and build from that. So once you take something which he agrees with, and then confront him with the fact that he may be losing the opportunity for a really meaningful life, then you can hopefully open a discussion as to where the real meaning is. Now, the final remark that I want to make is this. Studying Torah is a big part of Torah living. To a certain extent, studying Torah is self-discovery. Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu created the Torah with all of the mitzvos, the rules, and the narratives, and he created the human soul, and he created them to fit together harmoniously, to reinforce one another. So that when you learn Torah, when you learn it, first of all, correctly, and when you learn it well, often there's a certain sense of, yeah, that's right. I can see that. I can see how that's supposed to work. Because it's designed that way to fit the soul that Kodesh Baruch Hu gave you. So part of what's going on is a self-discovery, and then what you discover is that I really am part of this. It's not only that I have to make myself part of this, but part of me already is part of this. So that, for example, when you approach transitions, which are hard, and some of the transitions are hard, but it's never one-sidedly hard. Part of you resonates, part of you is attracted, and then another part is in opposition, another part resists, and then you suffer an internal conflict. Well, internal conflicts like this are very fruitful because you have an opportunity to restructure who you are more in tune with the things that you think are really important. Not the Schiller, you should be well, one of the founders of Ohr Somayach, himself as a creative writer, said creativity comes from tension. Tension where things aren't fitting together right. Things need to be adjusted to fit together and to work together harmoniously, and the challenge to figure out how to make them work. Now you can do that on paper, and you can do it in your own personality, you can do it in your priorities, you can do it in your relationships. That sense is where the Torah gives you a sense of self-discovery in addition to discovery of what's out there. Because what's out there, what's inside, match to one another. That gives you the sense that what you're dealing with is realistic. So, this is my short introduction to the idea of meaning and the idea that the Torah's promise is to provide a life of maximum real meaning.